Hello and welcome to Viewpoints. My name is Kathleen Kieran, and today I have the distinct privilege of interviewing Michael Rollince, retired Special Agent in charge of the Washington Field Office, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's great to be with you.
I'm so excited, as the students are, to have you here because really you're one of those few people that have that bird's eye view of all of the terrorist and threat issues that have impacted Homeland Security and Homeland Defense over the last 2 decades. So let's start with an easy question. How do you look at the threat landscape currently, and what's next?
The former part of the question is clearly easier than the latter part, but it's something that we should be focused on. The threat, as most experts I think would tell you out there, continues to evolve. I think the United States government and multiple components have done an extraordinary job over the last decade in neutralizing the threat where they found it and taking the fight to the enemy. And now the challenge becomes, in this fiscally restrained environment, as different departments and agencies downsize and right-size, how do we focus our attention where it needs to be? How do we prioritize? How do we shape the workforce to meet the threat? And then, as you asked the second part, in terms of the what's next, not always easily definable, but certainly something you want those practitioners as well as the students and the people you bring here to the school to constantly be challenging themselves to find the time to think about that. Oftentimes, we spend an inordinate amount of time, and all of our time, focused on the here and the now with our heads down, doing what we've been charged to do across the government and in the private sector and in academia. When you come into an environment like this, it really does afford you the opportunity to step back, look at the bigger, broader issues, and truly think about what are you not doing that you should be doing, could be doing, and going forward will be doing across the spectrum of all the threats.
You can't unring a bell, Mike. We talked about that in class. So how would you reframe, given your life's experience, how would you reframe how we prosecute domestic threat or international threat for that?
Well, having grown up in a law enforcement family and spent a career in law enforcement and having relatives to include my son in law enforcement, I am obviously very keen on not just giving back to the community, but on the rule of law and on holding people accountable when they break the law. So I don't think that we should ever move away from not only adhering to our Constitution and law, but using law enforcement as an effective tool in this fight. And whether we're fighting terrorism or organized crime or violent crime, drugs, you name it, law enforcement has been and always will be a key part of the overall solution. But in the war on terror, it should not be viewed as something bigger, larger, and grander and more capable than it is. And I think if we've learned anything over the last 10 years, it's you bring the strengths out of your toolbox, the Department of Defense in particular when they're needed, the incredible capability and components of our intelligence agencies, and adhere and coalesce those in a true collaborative form, a true team going at this fight. And I think it is because of our ability to do that that we are where we are today. Are we out of the woods? No, I don't think we should ever expect to be fully beyond this. But I honestly believe that we will have this threat back in a box that it looked like a few decades ago if we continue to pursue when we need to and to step back, to right size and to reprioritize when we need to.
So you've made a case really for whole of government approach.
Right.
What about the whole of community approach? I know you do a lot of work in the community. You look and you listen and you pay attention to victims of our terrorist events, and you're building partnerships with purpose. Tell us about that.
I would have to say that it's perhaps the most significant and greatest underutilized resource available to us. The community is broad, it's diverse, it's engaged, it is committed, every bit as committed in many ways to playing a meaningful and sustainable role in assisting us in getting this right. And oftentimes we shy away from those that we don't know well. And this is one instance where we need to just get to know these communities better and ensure that they understand that we view them not as part of the problem, which has been the challenge of the narrative of the last several years, but clearly as an integral part and a meaningful part of the solution. We are in their communities. It is their communities' along with ours, that are at risk if we choose to do nothing. So the message should be and needs to be that this is about protecting all communities, theirs, ours, everyone's.
Tell me how that's impacted how the Federal Bureau of Investigation does their job.
Within each field office, there is a certain responsibility for what is referred to as traditional outreach, and my view is that it's fine to know who your community leaders are and for the leadership in the community to know who the heads of federal, local, and state agencies are. But if we really want to take full advantage of the community capability, we need to get far beyond that. We need to get into what is beyond a true dialogue and into collaboration and into engagement with this community so that they truly feel they know what is expected, they know how they can help beyond a handshake and a hello, and most important of all, that they get to a point that they feel comfortable picking up the phone and calling for help when needed, or letting people know when they see something that is out of the ordinary that they perceive needs to be resolved and that may be a threat to their community. And that spans the spectrum of communities. This is not just Arab American, Muslim, it's Hispanic American, it's the Black community, it's any minority community. You focus on and you deliver and you want to be at a point where they feel comfortable. I guess that's the operative word that I want to use. You'll know that you have succeeded when those communities feel as comfortable calling the FBI or local law enforcement on an issue as they do calling a relative for help.
Mike, today we talked about CVE. Let's talk about that as a threat domestically.
The challenge of countering violent extremism is multifaceted, and it begins with not really having a full and complete understanding of exactly what is the subject matter under discussion. And approximately 2 years ago now, the White House National Security Staff released a strategy followed by an implementation plan asking for a whole of government approach that we take on the challenge of identifying, finding, and then addressing those in our society who, for whatever their reason, have chosen to go down a path of violence. And we believe that that particular choice, again, spans multiple threat areas. It could be violence in the domestic arena, it could be international terrorism, it could be gang violence, drug-related violence. But the question that is out there and the challenges that are out there is, as you identify individuals who appear to be headed down that path, going from being radical about an idea, which is not against the law, to actually choosing to espouse and engage in illegal, unlawful activity. So the challenge to the law enforcement community, the education community, the social services community, is how do we identify those people? What is the process whereby we can find them, get to them, and in simplistic terms, get them off the path before it's too late? And it's a new approach. It's a logical approach. It isn't rocket science, as I say, but it needs everyone from multiple bureaus, agencies, and departments to understand how to focus, how to define, how to identify, and then how to implement the various tasks that have been laid forth in the strategy and in the implementation plan.
Thank you. A great response. Let's talk about the educational environment.
Sure.
Here at NPS, we seem to attract the best and the brightest of the practitioner world. We add academic rigor and send them out to change the world effectively in their organizations. The Bureau has been a huge supporter of this program. Tell me the value you see in it. I know the value we find from taking an experienced professional that has earned that experience by being part of history and being able to talk about that history in order to help the students make better decisions about future.
There are probably 3 or 4 separate but related responses to that question. So you can come here and engage your students in a dialogue and challenge them, given their multiple disciplines from which they arrive, at the local level, the state level, the private sector, government, academia themselves, to take on an issue and think through it and give them the time that they often don't have in their day-to-day existence with their heads down doing their job to help you formulate your thinking and come up potentially with a solution that is logical, thoughtful, and hopefully practical and doable that otherwise may not have come to your attention. It's my view early on in this CVE assessment that I've been working on for the last several months, that as we enter this period of continued restrained fiscal environment, as it's referred to in many areas, that local, state, and federal government are not going to have an unlimited supply of funds or staff to put at any initiative, let alone this one. Why would we reinvent the wheel? Why would we take ourselves down paths that have already been walked by academics who have been looking at this very phenomena and this challenge from multiple perspectives for decades, from what I've found? There is an incredible body of knowledge in academia, an incredible amount of subject matter expertise, and many of those people who've been thinking and writing and doing on this topic walk the halls of this facility. Shame on us if we don't take advantage of that expertise, again, as part of the whole of government and even outside of government. I would call it more a whole of country approach, because everyone from the bureaus and the agencies to, as I'm fond of saying, to mom and pop and night basketball, have a role to play if we are going to truly design and implement an effective and sustainable countering violent extremism program.
Thank you. Looking back to look ahead, describe for us the ideal recruit. 30 years ago, it would have been perhaps a criminal justice or law enforcement background, an accounting, a legal background, at least for the FBI. Sure. But talk to us a little bit about the ideal recruit for the Homeland Security, Homeland Defense leadership in the next 10 years.
Okay. It's hard for people like you and I to think that there might be someone out there who doesn't have an appreciation for the mission, given what law enforcement, what Homeland Security apparatus, what the Defense Department, the intelligence community does day in and day out for this country. But the ideal recruit in my mind is that young man or woman who comes with a thirst for knowledge, a true sense of dedication and commitment and patriotism. In my mind, it's about 80% work ethic and an ability to work collaboratively, not always collegially, but collaboratively as a team, because not much of this gets done by individuals working on their own. And again, when you talk about the strength that's brought to bear against a particular crime, a threat within a program by different departments and agencies, local, state, federal, working together with a common focus, find me the individual who can work in that environment and who truly looks forward to getting out of bed every morning and can't wait to get to work. That's the ideal candidate. In terms of educational background, I don't know that there's any one or two disciplines, but as I look at the world as it was 30 some odd years ago and as it is today, I try to encourage these young applicants take business courses and take computer courses, because everything in this world has become a business of one sort or another. And as the world flattened out, an ability to understand how government intersects with the private sector, intersects with academia, and how much of that intersection and interaction is now done on social media and on the web and on whatever platform is going to be next. Getting back to the what's next, bring me those people who can anticipate what does the future hold. And I'm not looking for crystal ball people, but just people who are willing to take on that challenge of anticipating and then building the solutions before the problem slaps you in the face.
Michael, your viewpoint matters to viewpoints. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.